Hello, everyone. My name is Wesley Emblidge. I am the Marketing and Education Manager at the Coolidge Corner Theatre, and thank you so much for joining us for another one of these virtual education seminars. You're in the right place, hopefully, for our discussion of the Royal Tenenbaums tonight with Josh Larsen from Filmspotting. It's going to be fantastic. We've got a nice big crowd tonight and a ton of questions already submitted to get through. So in case this is your first time doing one of these seminars, let me just quickly explain how this will work on a technical level. So many of you submitted questions ahead of time, and we're going to get to those. But that's not the only way to submit questions. If you have a question right now that you want to get in the lineup, or if there's just some question, comment, reaction that occurs to you while we're talking, if you look at the bottom of your screen, you're going to see three different buttons. You're going to see the Q&A button, the chat button, and the raise hand button. So if you got a question, comment, reaction, the best spot is that little Q&A button. It's called that for a reason. If you click on that, you can type in your question and I'll get it in a nice handy list that we can go through. There's also the chat button. The chat is probably a better place to just kind of like talk with the whole crowd and throw in recommended links or stuff that you're less interested in us discussing, but you want to just kind of throw out there or react with. It's easier for us to kind of go through the list from the Q&A button. Also, if you want to kind of join us in person, you can click the little raise hand button, and what that'll let me know is that you want to join us and ask your question on camera. And so I'll be able to kind of bring you guys in one by one to ask your questions and do all that. So that is about it. Without further ado, I want to bring in Josh and get started.
Hey, Wesley. Hello, everyone.
Hey. Thank you so much for doing this. This is going to be great. Your lecture was great. You are one of the few people who actually edited their own lecture, which was like, you were like, I really want to do this. And I was like, by all means, awesome.
Yeah. I hope it passed the bar because there was a lot of experimenting on my part, but I had a ton of fun with it. So
no, it was fun. So let's get right into it. So I'm going to start with a question from Saga. Saga asks, do you think Dudley serves a particular narrative purpose, or is his character mainly for comic relief? I feel like he might be a metaphor for the family's inability to piece together their broken bond, since he himself is unable to piece together the puzzle that Rayleigh gives him.
Yeah, I love the visual metaphor of the puzzle you're mentioning there, because I think that's not only a great visual gag, but is, as so many gags in Anderson stuff, it's reflective of character, it's reflective of relationships, right? The jokes are not only funny, but reveal so much. And I included Dudley, in this family tree because I think he's definitely more than comic relief. He really becomes embedded. I mean, he's kind of embeds himself in two families, right? As I mentioned, with Raleigh, they have this strange father-son, but also patient-doctor. And eventually, as the movie goes on, almost more like it's almost reversed, where Dudley becomes his caretaker as things turn for Raleigh. So I think Dudley's really a crucial character. And in that final scene at the cemetery, it's important that he is there. I think it's important that in the roundup montage, sort of the where does everyone end up, that they do include Raleigh and Dudley going on that book tour. And they seem to be kind of enjoying the place they've found themselves, whether that's because of what they've discovered in the experiments or whether it's the sort of familial relationship they have now. So yeah, I think he's as crucial really as any of those extraneous family members that I talk about.
That's interesting. I hadn't thought about it in terms of who do we check in during that roundup at the end? So who quote unquote matters based on that framework. And I'm trying to remember, we have another question about Pagoda, and I'm trying to remember if we get him in that final roundup. I did just rewatch the film.
I don't think, I just watched it again.
I certainly don't think we get like a specific moment about him. He's probably in a scene.
So Royal says, take back Pagoda. Which I think is meant, for us to assume that he will rejoin the family after his kind of foray away with Royal, which you have to wonder, was that a foray away with Royal in rejection of the family, or to kind of make Royal, as I said, kind of be his conscience at that moment?
Right.
But I put so much weight in the fact of who closes the gate. In that final moment of the movie at the cemetery. I love that touch that it's Pagoda after everyone is left out. It's a nod to the fact that, yes, he's still a servant, you know, there's a little bit of a hierarchy still at work here, yet he's also the bridge, as I was just saying, between Royal and the family. So he should be the one to kind of close that chapter. And yet he's there with the family. So he still is a part of that group too. I think just having him do that gesture summarizes who he is as a character so much for me.
Mm-hmm. We have 2 raised hands, and I am going to get to you guys in a moment. I just want to, while we're on this specific subject, I'll go to this question submitted ahead of time from Michael. So Michael says, assuming we consider Pagoda family, and I do, I said I'm not necessarily sure how I feel, but Michael does. How might we consider his stabbing and subsequent care of Royal to be the ultimate distillation of Anderson's definition of family in this film? Something that both causes pain and necessitates compassion. Do the parallels hold up with other relationships in the film?
Ooh, great question. What you're describing, it's almost like, which maybe Anderson does feel this, a lot of his movies would attest to it. He sees family as being a sadomasochistic relationship. And I think that's kind of what you have there with Pagoda. Man, I wish, and watching this with my daughter, she asked too, like, I wish we knew more about what happened in India, in Calcutta, you know, because it's explained he was hired to kill him and he stabbed him and took him to the hospital. Those are the only details we get. And I think if we knew, if that story was filled in, we might understand a little bit more about this dynamic that you're asking about. I kind of also love that it's just left up to mystery though, and we have to kind of fill that in. But as far as representing, you know, the other relationships in the family or family dynamics in general, I think this movie is so good because each relationship is complicated depending on which child it is. If you just look at the 3 main children, I mean, is Richie and Royal, is that Richie seems very close and in some ways is instrumental, as I said, in bringing the family back together. But is there also a level of codependency at play there? And, you know, is Chaz's anger more of a reasonable response to Royal? I don't know, maybe there's a family therapist with us here tonight that might be a little better at kind of categorizing each of these dynamics. Because I think Pagoda and Royal can stand in for a lot of what Anderson thinks about family relationships, but I also think we can't necessarily apply it to each relationships we see because they're also nuanced, which again is what's so great about the film.
It's interesting what you say about wanting to see like what happened in India, because I would watch a prequel to this movie. I was really struck rewatching it. Just that opening sequence, that whole montage of them as children is just like perfect Wes Anderson. It's just everything is distilled into that, all of the quirks and all the aesthetics, but it's just like, it's so well paced and the kids are so funny and every shot is so packed with so many jokes that I was like, it's almost sad when we get to the adults because I'm like, wait, these kids are great. Like I want to see more of these. And one could imagine also an insufferable version of that movie that's just all precocious children, but Moonrise Kingdom is full of children and is a delight, you know.
I had a horrible thought today, thinking more about our discussion tonight, is like, wow, you know, you could actually make a TV series of the Royal Tenenbaums as kids. And then I thought, I hope no executive ever has that thought because you could, but I don't want that to happen.
You've just put it out of the world, so I think you may have. It's now your fault if it happens. I want to bring in, so Jason, we have a raised hand from Jason. Jason, I'm going to promote you to a panelist. Bear with us one moment.
Well, I know Jason.
Oh, Jason, you're muted.
You sure do. How you doing, Josh?
Hey, teammate. How are you?
Good. So, hey, I was thinking, first of all, this is favorite Wes Anderson movie, maybe favorite movie ever, which I know strong words, but I was thinking about it in the context that you laid out, which is why I like this sort of thing. And I was thinking about Royal. And as I thought through it, I thought, is Royal has this journey that I perceived in the context you put it as a stepfather. Clearly he's not the stepfather, but a stepfather that sort of earns his way into the father role. And then I thought to myself, well, perhaps that's not right. Perhaps he's just like all of us. We have we are fractured parents, we have fractured parents, and it's just part of the messiness of life. And I just wondered, do you see it one way or the other, or do you see it your own way? I mean, what do you think about that?
Yeah, so for context, Jason was my teammate when we played Trivia Spotting not too long ago. So,
and maybe tomorrow again.
Yeah, we'll see. Yeah, something we've been doing with the podcast. Yeah, Royal's journey. I think there was another question too. I'm not sure, Wesley, if Jason submitted it or if there was something else kind of asking about, how much do you think Royal has really changed, which I think is related to what you're talking about, Jason. And I see a lot of change there, even though I recognize that it's maybe not complete before his death, but he's certainly reoriented himself. And I think that's truer to the human experience. Is I think when we have conversion narratives in films, they ring false because that's not how we become different people. The first step is reorientation, to face a different direction. And I think absolutely we can say that Royal has done that. At least I believe he has. There's something in the line about, he says, I think it's to Richie, but I'm going to live. He's not talking there about his medical condition. I think he's talking about knowing where he has to face now. And maybe the only shift Royal makes in this movie, which for me is enough, is in what Henry Sherman says. I think I don't think you're a son of a bitch. I just think you're kind of an asshole, right? I think that's the direction. So he's not, he's shifted, but he's still kind of an asshole.
Great. Well, thank you for taking the question, and thank you.
Yeah, good to see you.
Good to see you too.
Thanks, Jason. We might as well go to the question you're referring to, Josh, from Grace, who had asked, there's never a moment where Royal believes he is wrong. He's either right about getting divorced, right in fighting for his family, or right in trying to apologize for what he's done. The transition from fighting for his family to apologetic post getting kicked out of the house is encapsulated only in one moment where he says, the last 6 days have been the best 6 days of probably my whole life. There's no wallowing in self-shame, doubt, regret, but he is the only character with agency. That gives a strange but true imbalance to the film.
Yeah, thanks. That's getting another aspect of this. And, when he says that, what that really means is that he's felt better. He's enjoyed these past few weeks. So I guess the next question to ask is, okay, but that's not repentance if you're just doing it for you to feel better. So the next question to ask is, what effect has that had on the family? And I don't know at that point if we could say that his presence has had an effect. I do think by the end of the film, we can say that it has brought them to a better place. I don't know that Royal is entirely responsible for that, but I think he was kind of the linchpin. He had to be there. His trauma had to be solved in some way, or at least addressed, before the rest of them could get to a healthier place. And as I said in the seminar, Richie is crucial to that. Maybe he is codependent, but he's also crucial to keeping those ties connected as much as they were. And Henry Sherman, I do think, is crucial to that, being a steadying force, allowing Etheline to claim her independence, because she knows that she has him by her side as some sort of support. And so yeah, I think Royal is in that tension. That's a really good way to describe it. There is an imbalance there. And maybe he doesn't see like the full sort of redemption other movies might give him. But I think that when we see the family is that much healthier, they are together, they are have better bonds at the end, that he's kind of earned a certain forgiveness in making things better for them. That's sort of the reconciliation.
Yeah. And I would regret if I didn't mention the line. So Grace quotes the line, the last 6 days have been the best 6 days of probably my whole life. That's immediately followed by arguably the best line in the movie. I mean, that's a hard thing to say because there's so many great lines, but the narration of right after he said it, he realized that it was actually true, which is a perfect kind of encapsulation of this whole thing of just like of lying, but then telling the truth and this kind of back and forth.
Absolutely. Yep, his instinct is to lie, right? And even if he's lying about how he really feels. Yeah, it's such a great moment.
We have a raised hand from Tim. So Tim, I'm going to promote you to a panelist. Hello.
Hi.
Hey, Tim.
Guys. How you doing? So I have to geek out for 1 second. Josh, I'm a huge fan of Filmspotting. I've been listening for the past six years, and it's really
Thank you.
made me a better cinephile from it.
Thanks so much.
We all know your Wes Anderson love is so real. You love this filmmaker, as I do. I think Rushmore is my favorite film of his, as is yours. But I think this is right below it. Amazing film. I also want to kind of bring up your book, Movies Are Prayers, which I have here.
Awesome.
I swear to God, you're not paying me for this, obviously, but I want to quote you a little bit from this book, because I was leafing through it after I watched it. You say from the chapter of Movies as Prayers of Reconciliation, you talk about failing to reconcile can mean the death of community, and some of our lives are littered with people with whom we've been unable to reconcile and who might as well be dead. And I thought of that, just in the sense of there's so much death and the after effects of death present in this film, and just that whole notion of grappling with death and losing someone and regretfully not saying something to them that you might have wanted to say to them, kind of permeates how Royal relates to the kids, and how Chaz relates to his wife and his kids from that. So that's kind of my take on it, and I'm just wondering your thoughts on the Royal Tenenbaums as a prayer of reconciliation, just in general.
Yeah, well, thanks for the plug. Appreciate it. But I think that's, I think there are different levels of reconciliation going on here. You make me think, Tim. It's really provocative. Who do we think, maybe among those three children, and we could include Etheline as well, that they feel the most reconciled with Royal at the time of his death? Because I think there are degrees there. I think Richie was maybe further down that path already. And so I feel like we can probably say that he feels fully reconciled. One of the most crushing but also moving moments is Chaz in the ambulance with Royal. Because that's where I think we get a hint of an answer for where he might be. I don't know that it's complete. I do think if he had not been in that ambulance, he would probably be a lot further away from some sort of full reconciliation. And the person I thought of as you were talking to him immediately, because I don't have the answer for him, maybe someone else does, is Margot. Because I think her relationship with Royal, unless I'm forgetting a moment, feels the most unresolved still at the end. And part of that is because she has her own independent journey of Royal with Richie, and kind of coming to terms with what that relationship means. So I don't want to accuse Anderson of forgetting about her in this trajectory, but it's kind of, she almost has two major things to reconcile with. So yeah, if I'm forgetting something with Margot, let me know, or if someone else knows, how has a stronger feeling of where she might be with Royal at the end. My instinct is to say that she probably still has a lot to work through. I don't know if he, if he met her where he should have while he was still alive, like he might have the others. Oh, someone's saying here in the chat, he does call her his daughter instead of adopted. Okay, yeah. And a little thing like that is huge, right? For a proven liar and someone insensitive to everyone else's feelings, to even, again, it's a degree of inches. It's the son of a bitch to asshole thing, to even be aware that that's more thoughtful to say daughter. Thanks, Tim.
Josh, thank you so much. And thank you for all that you and Adam do every week.
Appreciate it.
Thanks, Tim. We had a couple of people who have shown up later, so I just want to make sure people know that if you want to ask questions, use the little Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and you can type in a question, or if you hit the little raise hand button, that'll let us know that you want to join us on video and bring up your question, comment, reaction to us in person. So we have two different people who've asked about Eli. I think our structure that we're just covering for this night is kind of just jumping character to character, as you did in the lecture, because these people are all so different and interesting. So Kat asks, what do you think is the significance with Eli's fascination with the Old West? His Custer book, the hat and the fringe jacket, the war paint, etc. It's an interesting design contrast to everything else, which is so thoroughly New York, even to the point of parody. Separately, Ross asks, what is the allure of being a Tenenbaum to Eli, even as the family is so fractured and dysfunctional?
That's a great question, because at the point he kind of tries to enter back in, they're at their lowest. So there's something, I floated out there, was he just jealous of the attention they got when they were younger? If that was only the case, he's the most, at the main point of the movie, he's the most successful, right? But he's still drawn to them in some way. And again, I can only surmise that it was the only family he knew aside from his aunt. We don't get much of a sense of, what that relationship was or how caring it might have been. It might have been very caring, but it was also, I think we see, a home without siblings. And so just a totally different experience from what was going on across the street. So I think it is just that sense of belonging, the acknowledgement that Etheline talks about, that continually draws him to this family. And yet, this connects with the costume design question. He's always going to be kind of an imposter, right? Even as like Royal at his worst might consider Margot an imposter. Eli is a degree away in terms of, being the kid from across the street. And I think the costuming reflects that. Just as you rightly note, great observation, it's so out of bounds with everything else we see. Which is very New York specific. Maybe Pagoda's costuming, which kind of claims his heritage a little bit, stands out as well. But Eli is definitely posing. I mean, it's a simple way to just declare how inauthentic he is really. I mean, we know here's a guy who grew up in New York City and he's writing these Western novels. That's already a form of posing, unless he spent some middle years we didn't hear about living on a ranch or something. But we don't get that impression for the way he acts. So I think the costume design is, not only a nice like aesthetic flourish, which we know Anderson layers throughout, but also again, revealing of character, revealing of who he is and that he's posing. And I think in that cemetery scene, he's still wearing the getup, isn't he? I don't know if anyone can remember offhand for sure, but I do believe that he's still dressed like kind of a strange cowboy at the end, which I'm not sure what that says about how far he might have come.
There's also something, we have another question that's asking just which Wilson brother do you think gives the better performance? And Owen Wilson in this movie, there's something about his energy. Obviously everyone in this movie is giving a Wes Anderson-y kind of quirky, not off-putting, but like, heightened performance. But there's something about Owen Wilson that is almost on this other level of he has this like darkness in him that obviously many of these other characters do, but in every scene, he's just like off kilter in this slightly disorienting way. He's always doing something. I mean, when he shows up with the war paint, driving the car, you're kind of like not shocked, even though it's a very like out of nowhere moment. But it's just like, it's in keeping with how he has been throughout this entire movie.
Yeah, I think that's one of Owen Wilson's, great gifts as an actor, and really why I miss him in this sort of material is that he just has that knack for throwing something in there that never reaches the level of ostentatious. Like it never tries to trump the scene, but it tweaks the scene. It gives it a little nudge, a little twist. And you just kind of cock your head a little bit. Like, I wonder, Dignan does a lot of that in Bottle Rocket. It's a very Owen Wilson thing. Here, I think it's heightened by the drug issue. He definitely becomes a little more manic as the movie goes on. Eli is not a guy comfortable in his own skin. And that only becomes more apparent when he thinks he should be comfortable with the success that he's gotten and the literary fame. And deep down, he knows this is not him. And so the quirkiness kind of comes out even more. So I do think it's a great performance. You know, always worth reiterating that Owen Wilson is the co-screenwriter with Anderson on this one. I just think that's, you know, that's crucial to keep in mind. At the same time, watching this again this week, aside from Hackman, who is just like, just genius level work here, I think Luke Wilson might have given my favorite performance. There is, you mentioned, Wesley, how everyone seems a little heightened, I think, or, you know, in a Wes Anderson way, but not Luke. Not Richie is, you know, and part of that makes sense. He's depressive. Again, my daughter said he has the saddest eyebrows I've ever seen. And Luke could just, you know, he could just sit there, not pull an expression. And in this movie, that's his face, you know? And I think that's just so crucial to balancing the kind of broad humor we get, the physical humor, the wacky humor. And then you've always got Richie there as kind of the old soul of the family, even more so than Etheline in some ways. Who's maybe at once, you know, the most, or maybe it's because he's the most open to what everyone else is feeling, he's also the most wounded. And I think that Luke Wilson's gives a great wounded performance. So I'm not gonna, we could do a poll if we want, but I'm not gonna vote which one gives a better.
I think it's very easy to look at that performance against all of these bigger, broader, more heightened performances and be like, oh, he's not doing that much. Like, it's kind of easy. He's kind of a prop. But I think he is bringing so much in his voice and in the physicality, and that, like, it's very easy to imagine another lesser actor kind of just doing nothing and kind of just being a prop. And the movie would probably still function, but his scenes would not have the same impact at all. But on the other hand, Owen Wilson is also incredible in this. It is really hard to pick. But I was watching this and I was like, this is kind of, Owen Wilson is someone who I don't find always works for me in a movie. He's had many films where he's kind of placed in weirdly, but I think he pretty much always works in Anderson movies, and it helps that he's writing with him, and so kind of being able to craft something that'll work perfectly for him. But I would feel pretty comfortable being like, this is the best Owen Wilson performance. I don't know about Luke Wilson, maybe that as well, but it's certainly the most Owen Wilson performance, the one to point to probably.
The hard thing with both of them is, you know, and I haven't seen everything they've done throughout their careers, but remember Owen Wilson went through like an action movie phase, and Luke Wilson wasn't he in Vacancy, like the horror film, which, you know, wasn't bad, but neither of them, I think, has really resonated in quite the same way in other people's work. And I don't want to say like that's limitations on them as actors, or if it's more like what you're talking about, Wesley, is when you're like so aligned with the creative vision at work here that it just allows you to be in tune as well and do something that it's harder to bring to the surface in other material.
Yeah, I mean, there are those actors who, like, they work really well with a certain filmmaker and they can never quite. You could point to maybe like a Christoph Waltz, who like has given incredible performances, but like outside of Tarantino movies, I don't know if he's ever really worked for me. Certainly he's had many performances that really didn't work for me. There's some people that are so locked into one thing, and especially when we're introduced to them through that thing, and that's what brings them their fame or Oscars or whatnot. It's kind of hard afterwards to figure it out.
Yeah, some of it might be on the audience too, is not being able to to see them in a different range.
Yeah. We have a raised hand from Joan. So Joan, I'm going to promote you to a panelist.
Hey, Joan.
Hi, I didn't realize I'd be on screen.
Oh, you are. Welcome. Joan is our wonderful development consultant here at the Coolidge.
And devotee. But I wondered, to an earlier comment that you made, do any of the characters really evolve in this film from when we meet them? I can't remember exactly the comment you made, but I just thought that
I think, well, that's a good question. I think, you know, we talked about Royal and how evolve is maybe a strong word for him, but I do think there's change. Richie, I mean, we could go through each one. I think Richie I would like to think is in a healthier place, because he's obviously at the midpoint of the film in the darkest place. So I feel like he probably has, I think Chaz maybe has, separate from his relationship with Royal. I talked about how I'm not quite so sure where his level of reconciliation is. But I think in his own life and his own coming to terms with his wife's death, I think he's maybe evolved, to use your word, the most. Or
Chaz is definitely the one I would point to. I think
you think so?
The bit with the garbage truck at the end, that's like
one
of the most moving things in the movie, really, is him just like popping out and smiling, and you're seeing him smile, and you're like, oh my God, I haven't seen him smile. Like out of any character, I'd probably point to him the most, because especially because he's in such a terrible place at the start. I mean, all of his characters kind of are, but him especially, like our introduction to him is running these fire drills and breaking down and
and so I think, I think like Margot and Richie are still kind of an open question. I'm not entirely sure what we're supposed to think of their relationship at the end of this film. What the next day after the cemetery means for them. And so
Carl actually asked that, like, what do we think is in their future?
I mean, if we buy Margot saying we're just going to secretly be in love with each other, it doesn't seem like that's where they're at the end. She's got a hand on his shoulder. They're sharing an umbrella. People are paired off in that final scene, and they're a pair. So they're definitely in a different place than they were at the beginning of the film, even in regards to each other. So I would say they've evolved too. We just don't quite know where to what.
Yeah. Thank you, Joan, for that question. Hannah in the chat notes that Christoph Waltz is in the French Dispatch. So I hadn't even thought of that, but I guess we will see if maybe he can finally click into place in another very specific filmmaker.
That'll be interesting.
A user whose username, I can't tell if it's their first name or their last, KMRED says, what do you make of Royal's relationship with his dead mother? Which I had not actually even really thought about, but it is this interesting other family member that exists in this very specific way.
Yeah, he brings her up a couple of times, doesn't he?
Yeah, a lot.
So that's telling in and of itself. What is the ritual of going to the cemetery? Because he doesn't strike us as someone who would have time for that in his life. I don't have an easy answer to that, but there is something there, definitely.
Yeah.
And it could go two ways. It could go either he had a terrible relationship with her, and that has spawned into poor relationships with his own children, and I sense affection for her from him. He had a very good relationship for her and sees his own failures are kind of like reflected in that, and as a father, as a parent. And so when she comes to mind, it's kind of an accusatory for him, and that's why things are conflicted. So yeah, it could go any number of directions, but I think you're absolutely dead on that's crucial and a meaningful aspect of his character.
But I think this, like, both things can be true, and that can be true, but I also think certainly part of him being like, let's go to the cemetery and visit my dead mother, is trying to invoke a certain amount of guilt of like, I'm dying, you don't want to be visiting my cemetery and have regrets, like kind of trying to like pound this into their heads. Because I am skeptical, certainly, that he does this on a regular basis. I mean, it sounds like in their childhood they would do it on occasion, but I would be surprised if it's something he was doing every week while living in this hotel.
Right. Or, and it could also be the sort of thing like he thinks, well, this is what I should do as a father, right? Like I maybe have never visited this grave, but isn't this what families do? And now I'm trying to be part of a family. So I'm going to like just do the action, even if I don't bring the meaning.
Yeah.
He's a complicated guy.
To a certain extent, we're watching this movie, and this movie is about him trying to figure out like, oh shit, I haven't been a father all this time. Like, what do I do? Do I take them to go bet on dog fights? Like, what? Where's the line here? I have no idea. And he's just like testing these things: graveyard, dog fight, go-kart. I don't know.
Right, exactly.
Michael Bryan asks, would this film land so well emotionally without the brilliant soundtrack that enhances so many key scenes?
Yeah, so this is, this is the thing that I think some people write Anderson off as, is if you see the use of pop songs or any material not composed for the film as a crutch. I don't, even though I agree with what you're suggesting here. I think the use of the songs lend themselves, are extremely powerful. Like they're definitely, those moments land more because of the songs. But I guess I would say it's not a crutch because we can all think of, I can't think of a specific example right now, but we've all been in movies where a pop song is used like to do all the work. And it's so obvious and it's incredibly hackneyed and kind of painful and kind of embarrassing to be sitting there listening to it. I have never had that experience with the use of a pop song in a Wes Anderson film. And as a matter of fact, I think part of the key is that here and there he'll use very well-known songs, but a lot of times these are, maybe not hidden gems, but quieter gems. And you realize this hasn't been just, a filmmaker sitting thinking, I want to use this song because it says this thing and I'm going to squeeze it in my film. It's someone who's doing the work of really thinking about how this particular music, lyrics, everything applies to this moment. And then not only that, but how is the actual filmmaking going to resonate with the music that I'm putting on screen? What are the editing rhythms going to be? What is the camera movement going to be? And that's where you get to the level of craftsmanship and artistry when you're using pop music, is when you're not just slapping it on top of the image, but you're incorporating the filmmaking with it. I think that's what Anderson does too. So I get the critique because it is a tool that a lot of filmmakers can use poorly. But again, in my fandom and defense, that's my argument why they're almost always perfectly used in his films.
Yeah. I mean, the interesting thing too is how he's kind of, at least recently, moved away from that more and more.
Yeah.
You see these the score for the Grand Budapest Hotel is, I think, one of the greatest film scores ever. And that film either has very few or maybe no pop songs in it. And Moonrise Kingdom is kind of similarly has another one of these Desplat scores that's gorgeous. And you wonder how much is that? I mean, is he hearing these criticisms and kind of rebuking them? Is it just the tone of these films are different? I mean, it's hard to imagine like a period film like Grand Budapest packed with pop songs. I mean, it certainly could happen and he could pull it off, but it's hard to imagine it any other way.
Yeah, I like to think it's just more growth of an artist, not necessarily growth in, wanting to reject things before because they were bad, but just wanting to explore new avenues of filmmaking. And partly is because, think about Isle of Dogs, which, again, a soundtrack that incorporates a lot of, Japanese influenced music. But also there's that great moment between Chief and the boy where there's a question of whether or not Chief is going to maybe bite him. And then they have this coming together, and I got to look at, because it's such an obscure song here, but which one is it? The West Coast Pop Art Experimental Band, who I'd never heard of. The song is I Won't Hurt You. So again, it's like that, no one's going to know the title of that song, but it's so perfect for that moment. And that gives you an idea of the level of thought that's going into using it in that film, in that scene, in a movie that otherwise I think does not have the sort of pop songs we're talking about here.
Right. And I think the idea of the embarrassing needle drop, it's killing me, because I know there was some film this summer that had all these kind of embarrassing, obvious uses of pop songs, and I cannot remember the name of it. But he is not necessarily, what Wes Anderson is not just he's not throwing these in. He's often the opening of this movie, this incredible opening sequence, it's Hey Jude, but it's a cover version. So he's not going with the obvious, just I want to evoke this thing that this song means to you and let that do all the work. He's mixing and mashing and moving these pieces around in all these ways. Kat in the chat is mentioning how there's that brief moment of silence before These Days starts with the whole slow motion walking away from the bus. And it's that is use in a kind of different way. It's giving this moment of just everyone to catch their breath before the sequence begins.
Yeah, and we could have the same conversation about the use of slow motion too, to be honest with you, because that's an overused technique in filmmaking that Anderson uses a lot. And but I think for similar, clearly intended purposes and effect.
And it's one that I feel like he has used less in recent years. I'm trying to think, like, is there a moment of slow motion in Grand Budapest or Moonrise Kingdom? And I'm not sure, but certainly there's a lot of it in this.
Yeah. I think his earlier stuff has more of it.
Yeah. So kind of speaking to these relationships all these films have together, Heather says, Wes Anderson almost seems to sample from a future Anderson film. The tent in the living room feels Moonrise Kingdom. I was thinking that as well. The Mountain Rat or whatever it was feels like Fantastic Mr. Fox. The elevator scenes seem Grand Budapest. Do you think he's weaving a bigger Wes Anderson universe intentionally across his films?
I hope not. We have enough universes. But I think it just speaks to the sort of aesthetic elements that appeal to him. And I think, that is what makes an auteur, someone whose handprint you can see in a frame of a film. And even if you hadn't seen the film before, you can see that frame and say, okay, and maybe that's why Moonrise Kingdom did feel so much like a Wes Anderson film as soon as you saw the trailer and maybe those tents were in it, because you're making the connection to Royal Tenenbaums.
Right.
So I think it's more that level. And things, just realizing that things like elevators have great cinematic potential, with their design and their movement. And so I think that's something that likely appeals to him as well. Someone who's constantly moving the camera vertically so often in ways that we don't often expect or aren't used to, borrowing that from elevators. And it makes sense that would be a motif for him.
Right. There are certain tactile objects and items that he just really enjoys. Trains are similar to the elevator thing. Like, you see that recur.
Yeah.
Tents kind of make sense in that it's more of a universe of objects. You can imagine him having a big warehouse full of these things and he's pulling them into these different films. It's not necessarily a shared universe, but it's a shared prop universe, perhaps.
Totally.
One of these props in this film, it's weird to call them that, but Camred mentions the Dalmatian mice and how then at the end we get the Dalmatian dog gifted from Royal to Chaz. What do we make of that?
I think it's just a nice through line, kind of a joke as well, but also just making that connection of here's something from his childhood, and that's what's being gifted back to him at the end. Though really, in a way, what Royal is doing is he's gifting back Chaz's sons their childhood, which Chaz had been robbing from them. So that's, we talked about who's evolved. That's another way Chaz has evolved, right? He's now going to treat his kids like kids. The moment you mentioned, Wesley, riding on the back of the garbage truck, with childlike abandon. I like that connection of something from Chaz's childhood visually being there at the end too, when he's making a return to childhood himself in some way.
Yeah. It'd be very easy to try to come up with a thesis about how, like, oh, well, the circles of the Dalmatian represent the different children or something like that. But I think you can also look at it on a basic level of, like, it's a dog with a pattern and it's visually interesting in a way that maybe a plain dog wouldn't be. And so that, I'm trying to think if I don't think there's any Dalmatians in Isle of Dogs, but at least here it's like, there's a color scheme going on to this dog in the way that just like a golden retriever might not necessarily have.
Aren't Dalmatians supposed to be? I mean, aren't they like the traditional firehouse dog? Is that?
Yeah, there's that too.
From child storybooks and stuff like that. So
yeah, I feel like
it's like there's a certain logic to it as well.
Alexa says, I found the use of color and space to be emotionally evoking. Do you think the use of both saturated color and enclosed space, example, townhouse, small rooms, the tent in the room Royal stayed in when dying, purposeful?
Yeah, as you were reading that comment, the space that immediately jumped to mind before you even said it was the tent and how that glow, that yellow glow. I think the heightened emotions are probably purposeful. I don't know that, the use of that is meant to communicate one thing. The tent for me is, just a place of safety and control. That's where he could go in there and have everything the way he wants it to be, and it'll be undisturbed. Kind of like Sam has his tent in Moonrise Kingdom, right? Everything's perfectly in its place. And so that heightened yellowish glow is one of warmth and comfort. There's something kind of alarming about the pinkish, orangish walls of the Tenenbaum, of many of the rooms in the Tenenbaum home, that I don't find, it's definitely heightened. I don't find necessarily comforting. I don't know what the intention might be. That's just kind of how I'm responding to it. And maybe it's a reflection of, that had to be a high stress way to grow up with all those language lessons and keeping track of that, and everyone having, and maybe those walls evoke that something, and it's something that's still there when they're adults as well. So yeah, I think we could probably go through the colors in each scene and ascribe certain emotions to them depending on how we react. I don't know that there's one, if the use of heightened colors overall is meant to say one thing. Other than that, these people are these are a lot of raw people we're meeting here, and their emotions are raw and heightened too.
Yeah. Well, so Jason notes how many people in the film wear a costume, and he capitalizes it, and he's like, capitalized with purpose, because yeah, these are very bold costumes, and often it is the colors. I mean, when you were talking about like what emotions these evoke, I instantly think of the red jumpsuits, right? And Ben Stiller, like that red jumpsuit is screaming the pain and the like intensity that he has, while he's also screaming to get out of the house because it's on fire and whatnot. I mean, so many of these costumes are, I feel like maybe more than any other Wes Anderson movie, these are the costumes you see in Halloween costumes a lot. Moonrise Kingdom, I think you see a lot as well, but like the Margot.
If you switch the term and say uniforms, then you're realizing every movie is just replete with uniforms. I mean, you could do a video essay just marking all the uniforms in his films. You've got the Zazoo Society uniforms. Even Dignan in Bottle Rocket, right? With the jumpsuits, he's got to have uniforms for this ridiculous crew. And Rushmore Academy, they're all wearing uniforms. Right. And I think that's absolutely a through line, and it's tied to this idea that all of his movies are interested in, which is belonging. And uniforms are an easy way to declare belonging. And sometimes that is, reflects a true sense of community. And sometimes it doesn't, the khaki scouts. I don't know that those are, mean little kids. that group doesn't necessarily suggest community or belonging, but I think you see it, in the Zazoo Society in kind of a warped way. And so that's kind of like what so many characters are reaching for or striving for. And sometimes they dress up because they don't have it authentically, but maybe if I wear the right thing, I'll feel like I belong. I think there's something like that going on in a lot of these films. And to go back to Chaz, it's a way to claim his kids, right? To hold them closer and tighter and protect them. And, just a nice little touch at the end that they're still wearing their jumpsuits, but they're in mourning color. They're the black jumpsuit. So,
well, Jason follows up on the question, and he says, like, these costumes, they're so big, and they're these uniforms. It seems kind of superficial and silly. However, there is a deep emotional resonance in the movie. To me, it's the deepest of any Anderson film. And he's kind of asking, how is that accomplished? It's so silly, but it's so deep. And I think that's the core thing of not just this film, but Wes Anderson films in general, is they are so heightened, and there's so much silliness, but then especially this one, but plenty of the others, there's a lot of sadness in it as well. And that clashes, I think it can be what turns some people off at a certain point. They're just like, I can't, this doesn't make sense to me. But for many of us, I think it's the thing we are in awe of when we watch these movies.
I'm not going to speak for anyone else, but the reason it works so well for me is that I don't want to deal with emotions in my real life. I don't want to talk about my feelings. And so if I sense, and this isn't to say that I don't like movies that are broadly emotional. I mean, musicals in particular, I can find very moving and affecting. But the reason few things affect me the way Anderson's films do is because I am unprepared for when that's going to hit. And in other movies, when I see the emotions coming, it's just how I'm wired. I start building up my defenses. And so even those musicals that move me, it's like, okay, here it comes, get ready. And then the ones that do it cheaply and exploitatively, I get angry at. It's like, you're not going to try this on me, right? And so the defenses really go up. Anderson, because I'm laughing so hard, when it hits, I'm just completely vulnerable. And that's why so many of his most moving moments for me have the humor wedded right there with them. And something like, Royal saying, "But I'm going to live," is at once a joke that's very funny, but it's also like, because I recognize he's starting to reorient here and how huge that is. So that's the only explanation I can give for why I, as a messed up person, as a repressed person, responds to Wes Anderson's movies as being moving. But you're right. So many people say, they're fake. They're right. I've heard so many times, there's not an ounce of genuine human emotion in them. And I think that's for the same reason. Those people aren't wrong. It's just genuine human emotion is not ever presented this way. We're not used to it. And some people find it off-putting.
Yeah. Ronald asks, should we consider what comes next after the opening montage as a possible exploration into why the Tenenbaums' exceptionality and genius peaked so early in their lives? I felt that the narrator's line about the failures, betrayals, and disasters appending their successful childhoods was further fleshed out in the film, a sort of reverse Rosebud.
I like that.
Yeah.
I mean, the structure and the implication seems to be that it was the divorce, and as well as Etheline continued to sustain the family unit incredibly, that's kind of the inciting incident. Now, we are told that, obviously Richie's tennis career, he was older when things fell apart. And we're given a specific reason separate from the divorce, why that likely happened. Chaz, we're given to believe is successful in business, and his traumatic event is the death of his wife. I'm just thinking out loud here, obviously, but I don't know. It's not necessarily as easy as blaming it just on the divorce, but you do get the sense that that's the inciting incident. But then again, we don't get the sense that Royal was that great of a father before the divorce. Those kids are what? Probably 10 to 13 or something during that opening scene. So they've had a childhood of living with him, as what we can only assume was an unloving father.
Right.
So yeah.
I mean, some of the few moments we get of him interacting with the children are his terrible answers about why are they getting divorced. And then even worse is him being like, his reaction to the play, and he's like, oh, it's all these kids just in costumes. I don't know. It's the worst possible thing you could say as a parent to your child. And so it's
at that point they're separated, right? I think they're separated.
Yeah, that's his moment of okay, maybe we're going to let him back in. And it's like, no, we are not going to let him back in. Whoops, bad idea.
So he's kind of given up on trying at that point. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. No, it's not even worth having him around. So we're getting to the end here. And I think maybe a good place to wrap up here is with, so Jason asks, when he says it's a silly question, in Josh's video essay, the Wes Anderson book behind him went from having the Grand Budapest Hotel on the cover to what I'm assuming is the opposite side of the book. Is he trying to send us a message? Jason asks, which is maybe a place to transition into just kind of talking about, you mentioned in your lecture, maybe we'll talk about Wes Anderson rankings and where this falls in his filmography for you. For people in the audience can chime in the chat, but I'm just curious, where does it fall? And were you sending a subliminal message in your lecture?
I would like to think I was that clever, but I'm afraid not. That's just kind of where the book is. So I, as well as we heard, someone else has Rushmore as their favorite. I don't know if that will ever be displaced for me, just because of, the experience of it kind of, and it didn't happen the first time I saw it. I liked it when I saw it, but I didn't think it was this work of genius until a few years later, but it did kind of unlock Anderson for me. So that's number one. Isle of Dogs, I just adore. It helps that I'm a huge stop motion fan. It helps that I think it's his most pointedly political film in a way that I think was really needed when we got it. So I've got that at number 2, actually. And then Royal Tenenbaums is 3. Obviously, having just watched it, I feel like it should be number 1 because it's that solid. Fantastic Mr. Fox, this speaks to my love for stop motion, is 4. I am a Life Aquatic supporter. I do not believe it's a failure, but kind of is the most whacked out movie, but still a really good one. And then it goes Moonrise Kingdom, Grand Budapest Hotel, Bottle Rocket, and Darjeeling Limited. And, it goes without saying, I don't think any of them are bad. I think maybe Darjeeling has some of the most questions you could ask of it. But I really love all of these.
I think it is very true what you say about like, these films often take multiple views to kind of unlock. And I think it is partially that like this whole superficiality, but then deeper emotion, and you're kind of not prepared for it. And so going back in, knowing that that's there, but you can still be surprised by it. I mean, even, rewatching Royal Tenenbaums, it's not like I'm forgetting that there's like an attempted suicide and whatnot in this movie, but I still I get hit by these lines and I'm like, oh my God, right. There is all this going on.
Yeah.
And these films, I mean, at the Coolidge, Wes Anderson films are truly our blockbusters. I mean, Grand Budapest Hotel, we have 4 screens at the Coolidge. Grand Budapest Hotel is one of the few films to not only play on multiple screens, which is really hard to do for a new movie, it basically never happens, but to sell out those screens consistently. I mean, the floor staff will trade horror stories of us playing Grand Budapest Hotel and just how difficult it was to keep up with the demand for it. And these films play all the time in repertory too. Life Aquatic, we sold out a show so fast for just like last year or the year before. There was like a whole diving team showed up, and it's like awesome. That is one of the, I think, broadly considered one of the lesser Wes Anderson films. It's not one of the more respected. I think maybe it was not as much of a financial success at the time, but even that is just it is bringing people back all the time.
Well, they're comedies. I mean, that's what we tend to forget, that these are comedies, and comedies are just inherently, for most people, more rewatchable. And that, as serious as these get and as moving as they can be, I still consider them comedies first, which is why they're probably among my favorite films.
Definitely. Well, we're at the end here, so I think it is time to wrap up. Thank you, Josh, for picking. I'm actually surprised it took us this long to do a Wes Anderson film in this series, considering how popular he is at the Coolidge. But I'm glad we finally made it happen. I want to quickly let people know about some events we have coming up. We do these seminars just about every week throughout November and December. It's going to be a little more sporadic, what with holidays and traveling, and we had the election last week. But we will be back next week, and we will be talking about M, Fritz Lang's M, very different movie from Royal Tenenbaums. We try to vary things week to week. That's going to be with Farron Smith-Nem, who's a film historian and is great. She just recorded her lecture today, and that's been sent out to people, so definitely go sign up for that. You can find this and all the other events I'm going to mention over at coolidge.org. The following week, so December 3rd, we just put this on sale. We're going to be talking about the Watermelon Woman. Cheryl Dunier's hybrid documentary-ish film, comedy, romantic comedy. There's a lot going on in that movie. It'll be really interesting to unpack. And that is going to be with Soraya Nade MacDonald from The Undefeated. That's going to be great. We are going to have 2 more coming up in December that aren't announced quite yet, but stay tuned, follow the Coolidge on all social media and sign up our email list, and you'll get notified about that stuff. The other thing, education-wise, we have going on pretty soon is if you enjoyed this one-night experience, if you want more and you want to dig into a subject deeper, we've been doing some of these multi-week educational classes getting into a subject. We just wrapped up one in October all about Black horror. That was fantastic. And our next of these classes is going to be all about Roger Corman. Roger Corman, the schlocky director-producer. It's going to be specifically talking about Roger Corman's producing career and talking about how he brought up all of these young filmmakers, Martin Scorsese, Peter Bogdanovich, Jonathan Demme, et cetera. Like, all these incredible people kind of got their first shot with Corman, and there was this whole concept of the Corman School of Film. So this is the school of the Corman School of Film to an extent. It's going to be taught by Jake Mulligan, who's a film critic, local film critic for Dig Boston. He has taught these seminars in the past, so people have definitely become familiar with him. It's going to be really great. Jake has been going so deep on this subject, so definitely go sign up. There is a capacity limit. Those classes are limited to just 30 people, so it can be a more, everyone have their microphone on, everyone kind of talking and exchanging ideas. So it might sell out. So if you're interested, definitely go sign up now. And the one other thing I will mention, there's a ton of other virtual events that you can check out at coolidge.org, but we did just today announce our Film Trivia Night fundraiser it's going virtual this year. We've been doing this for the past couple of years in person in the theater. Obviously we can't do that, but it's going to be a lot of fun. And actually what it means is that we've been able to make tickets cheaper and more accessible for people to help raise money, but still get to play trivia. And there's no capacity because it's virtual. So we can have as many people as we want joining in on teams, playing trivia to help support the Coolidge. So it's a win-win for everyone. So that's a bunch of stuff you can go check out. Thank you again so much, Josh, for doing this. This was a great discussion. Obviously we could talk about this movie for hours and hours and hours to go. There's so much to talk about.
Thanks for the opportunity. And I just want to say, if this is the first time for some people, follow the calendar, because you guys have had a fantastic lineup of guests and also films. So yeah, if you're just jumping in now, definitely sign up for another one. You got some great stuff coming up.
Thank you. And yeah, I'm working currently on the calendar for January and February. We're going into next year. Like, we will be doing these for quite a while. So if you enjoyed tonight, definitely check our calendar, see what we've got coming up. Thank you again, everyone. Good night.